Well, this video has certainly been a long time coming, but before we get into anything, I gotta give a big special thank you to the man, to the awesome friend that recommended this show to me and has been nagging me about the show since we met for about 2 years. So Zach Pope, thank you so much. You're a true Lannister, my friends. And guys, as a great man once said, a Lannister always pays his debts. And now, let's talk about Game of Thrones. Hey everybody, welcome and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, thank you so much for showing up. And if you're a cinephile and profess that you love movies and everything cinematic and you're kind of a nerd, then please consider giving this video a like and pressing the subscribe button so we can have a great conversation. Now, like I said at the beginning of this video, I had to give a big thank you to Zach Pope because up until this year, I had never seen a single episode of Game of Thrones. I've heard so much about it. Like, I have heard both positive and negative. I've heard from hardcore fans that it's just possibly one of the best, if not the best show ever created. And I have also heard from people that it's just too much. They don't understand why people get into it. And honestly, I was one of those people. I was on the side of, I'm not sure why people get into it, but now that I've seen the show, I completely get it because I am obsessed with the show. Guys, to give you an idea of how obsessed I am with this show, I went through all 7 seasons of Game of Thrones in 3 weeks. Is that healthy? I don't know, probably not, but did I have a blast while doing it? You betcha, and there's a reason for it. Game of Thrones is one of those shows, it's got some of the best acting, best storytelling, best compelling nature, best battles I have ever seen on screen. You guys know me. I'm a fan of good storytelling. I'm a fan of phenomenal performances. I'm a fan of great film and television. Game of Thrones encompasses all of that stuff. In fact, I would say that the show Game of Thrones is better than a mass majority of the movies I have seen in the past few years. And before I move any further on to this channel with the review of my thoughts on Game of Thrones, I do have to give you guys a major spoiler alert, because when it comes to Game of Thrones, I can't talk about my love for this show without spoiling some of the major elements inside of it. There's just so much good stuff in here. Okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about, first of all, let me give you my ranking of the seasons of Game of Thrones. I have it written down because I'm not a genius. I don't memorize stuff like that. But I will say my ranking for Game of Thrones, the season goes like this. It's season 4 is on top as my favorite. Then season 1, 7, 3, 6, 2, and 5. And that is not to say that I disliked any seasons of Game of Thrones. Ultimately, I didn't. Even if Game of Thrones did have a season that was kind of down, there were a lot of really great aspects in it to where even if I didn't think the season was great, I did think it was good. And unfortunately, I could be here talking with you guys for 7 hours about Game of Thrones, but I'm not going to do that to you. I'm just going to talk about my favorite aspects and my favorite characters of the show. First of all, right off the bat, he's a fan favorite. My favorite character in the show is definitely Tyrion Lannister. I love him from his arc from the very beginning to all of the journey that he had throughout the entire show of Game of Thrones. He killed his father and now he's riding off with Daenerys Targaryen and advising her so she can be sitting on the Iron Throne. I mean, his arc as a character is great. And if there's one thing I appreciated about this series, this Game of Thrones series, it's that it didn't hold back any of its content. I know that may be a statement that makes people uncomfortable. Yes, this show is extremely graphic in sex, violence, language, like all of it. But I think the show's all better for it because Westeros, as it's established throughout every single season of Game of Thrones, it's not Earth. Every single culture has the way it does things. Westeros is a medieval time. It's a different continent. So everything that we deem here on Earth, the kinds of things that we believe to be right and wrong, they do not. Some of the things that we deem to be socially unacceptable, they deem to be acceptable. And I think it's interesting because I think you learn about different cultures, even if they are fictitious. I mean, when Lord of the Rings came out, it was always so cool for me to learn about these different aspects, to learn about the dwarves, to learn about the elves, to learn learn about the men. And it's that same kind of thing when it comes to Game of Thrones, except times 10. Look, I love Lord of the Rings, but I will happily admit, I am more willing to watch Game of Thrones over and over and over again than I am willing to watch Lord of the Rings. Because you see, while Lord of the Rings is an epic, it's a triumph of filmmaking, Game of Thrones is a political epic. It's an epic of seeing who can get on the throne. It's an epic to see whose bloodline matches and clashes with whose. Seeing the houses battle against each other. From the very beginning when Eddard Stark gets his head cut off to the very end at Season 7 when Cersei Lannister is sitting on the throne and she is gonna go against Daenerys Targaryen, even if it means putting her family, her life, and her newborn baby in danger. Now, like I said, it's a lot to get through, but if there's one thing I can say, this show does have some surprises, and the biggest surprises for me were definitely character surprises. Although, yes, we know this show rips your heart out more than anything you can imagine. I mean, the Red Wedding, oh my gosh. But then again, it does give a little bit back, because then we had the wedding with Joffrey in Season 4, Episode 2, and that was amazing to see. And if there's one thing this show does that I don't think a lot of many other shows can masterfully handle, it's the way it handles its characters and the payoff and the breaking of your heart that it does. These are the aspects of Game of Thrones that I find truly amazing, because with every character in Game of Thrones, you not only get really attached to them, but when they are killed in George R.R. Martin's way of being a literary serial killer, your heart breaks, your heart rips, you're weeping, you're emotionally drained. I mean, after I got through watching The Red Wedding, I couldn't watch Game of Thrones for a solid 5 days. I needed myself to be emotionally back into the show, which just proves how much the show develops you with the characters. I mean, there are so many characters that I just fully love and care about now. Even characters like Cersei Lannister, great villain. I care about her as a character, not like aspiring to be her, but I want to see where her character arc ends. I mean, it's interesting where it's going to lead, especially since her and Jaime Lannister now have a new child on the way. And speaking of Jaime Lannister, that's actually one of the other things that I love about this show, is if there's one character that you can just downright despise and hate at the beginning of the show, it is the Kingslayer. It is Jaime Lannister. He's a character that you absolutely hate at the beginning of the show, but now, even through all the triumph and delusion and everything that he's going through with Cersei, yes, I admit Jaime Lannister isn't the most likable guy, but still, he's a character that I root for. I want things to get better for him. I don't know if they're going to, but it is great to see. This show does a great job at presenting you with characters you think you're going to despise. Imagine if you were presented with Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter. Now, imagine if Harry Potter and J.K. Rowling were able to take Dolores Umbridge as a character, that vile person that you want to see the worst things happens to, and they actually created some kind of a sensible way to make you root for her. That is what Game of Thrones does. Cersei Lannister, one of the worst characters ever. One of the worst characters and most evil, vile characters you can imagine. At a certain point, Season 5, you guys know this, the Walk of Shame, at a point, I just felt really bad for her. I wanted things to get better because Tommen's on the throne and the High Sparrow and all the religious zealots are running the place. I just felt really bad for her, and when she blew up the Red Keep, my heart sang and I was just so happy for her. But then again, once Season 7 rolled around, I kind of hated her, and I want Daenerys to let her burn. This show does a great job at getting you excited, getting you on board with the characters, making you see the world that these characters do, and they make you see an incredible journey. Honestly, at a certain point during particular episodes, I had to say, wait, is this character my favorite character in the show, or is this character my favorite character in the show? Obviously, I said Tyrion Lannister is, yeah, in general. But there were so many times, it's either between him or Arya Stark. I'm just a really fan of Arya's journey. And one character I thought was going to be boring and I would just lose interest in, but actually changed my mind around that, is Jorah Mormont. When you meet him in the beginning of Season 1, I thought this guy is going to be completely pathetic, he's going to be boring, and I'm going to want him to die. Now that it's in Season 7, he's one of the characters I don't want to lose. We came so close to losing him on so many occasions, but I love him as a character. He's just so passionate and so strong and willing to fight for Khaleesi and willing to fight for Daenerys Stormborn. of the House Targaryen, and I love this man so much. The acting across the board is great, and Jorah Mormont is one of those characters that I've seen had the biggest arc in this show, and it's just fantastic to see. But unfortunately, with every good thing that I do like about Game of Thrones, the battles, the visuals, the acting, the performances, there are things in this show that really started to get on my nerves, and I think they could have done better. For one thing, the religious zealots that came in seasons 5 and 6, I understand that by the end of season 6 you get payoff and you see the religious people go up in smoke, but it's just that at a certain point, the reason why I felt that season 5 and 6 were brought down so much was because of these characters. It's just, I didn't think they were well developed all that much. I understood the reasoning for why they were doing what they were doing, but at the same time, I thought that they were also kind of destroying the quality of what Game of Thrones is. Bran Stark is another one of those characters that at this point in my life, I don't really care to see where his character arc goes. At the very beginning, when you're learning about him having these visions, the fact that he can transport his mind from himself into taking control of the minds of animals, I thought that was great. I thought that was amazing. But after meeting with Max von Sydow and becoming the third three-eye raven or whatever the heck he calls it, Bran Stark now to me, he's like a Wikipedia page. He's like a dictionary, encyclopedia on Westeros. And he becomes just the most boring, bland character I have ever seen in this show. And it's just so disappointing because up until season 7 in Game of Thrones, Bran was one of my favorite characters in the show. Now he's probably my least favorite character in the show. But with all that aside, guys, yes, you can see that I'm not getting into every single thought process that I have about Game of Thrones. I'm just not. And it's simple because there are a lot of twists and turns inside of the show that if you haven't seen it, even if you stuck around for this semi-spoiler review of the show, I think you should still check it out because the show is amazing. It kept me on my toes. I can't really confirm whether it's my favorite show of all time right now, but I will tell you, if season 8 wraps up Game of Thrones with a bow, a nice ribbon, and gives us all the satisfaction of seeing the show end in a pleasing way, I will be more than happy to say that this show right now is my number one. It currently is, but I'm not going to claim it that way because I don't want to state things before any kind of television series is wrapped up. Guys, those are my thoughts on Game of Thrones, and I'm not going to rate this show until season 8 has come to a conclusion. But right now, it's got my seal of approval, guys. Like I said, I marathoned all 7 seasons they have so far in 3 weeks. And that is my recommendation that you go check it out as well. Guys, at the end of the day, it's not what I say that matters, it's what you say that matters. I know there are tons of Game of Thrones fans out there, so please do me a favor. Name your favorite character, name your favorite aspect, say what you love about Game of Thrones. And as always, guys, if you like what you've seen here and you want to see more, click right there and subscribe and become part of the fray of nerds who love cinema. You all have a fantastic day.